And without objection, for what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 367, I call up House Joint Resolution 59 with the House amendments to the Senate amendment thereto, and I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution, designate the Senate amendment, and designate the motion.
House Joint Resolution 59, joint resolution making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes. Senate amendment. Motion offered by Mr. Rogers of Kentucky.
Pursuant to House Resolution 367, the motion shall be debatable for 40 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, and the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Lowy, will each control 20 minutes. The House will be in order. I'd ask members to take their conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. I'd ask members on the minority side to take their conversations off the floor. The majority side. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the further consideration of H.J. Res. 59.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman will suspend. The House will be in order. I'd ask members to take their conversations off the floor on both the minority and the majority side. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move forward once again with H.J. Res. 59, the short-term continuing resolution that will keep the government open after the end of the 2013 fiscal year at midnight tonight. We simply can't wait a second longer. At this late hour, we must move ahead at an accelerated pace to keep the doors of our government open. For the sake of the nation, we must pass this continuing resolution. Mr. Speaker, the operative word here is continuing. The bills we've had on the floor, including this most recent version, do not shut down the government, as many colleagues on the other side of the aisle have falsely said. This bill and the ones before it continues the important functions of the federal government. That means our citizens will continue to benefit from these programs and services. And passing this bill will allow this Congress to continue to make progress on our important legislative work, including finding meaningful, responsible, bipartisan solutions to our fiscal problems, like the debt ceiling, sequestration, and the most immediate issue at hand, funding the government for the 2014 fiscal year. We did not bring a resolution to shut down the government, Mr. Speaker. We brought a continuing resolution to continue the government. A shutdown will help no one. It will only harm our nation's security and our economy. It will hurt our people who rely on the federal government's programs and services in some way or another, and who put faith in their government to act in their best interests. Mr. Speaker, the House is not the body that is refusing to act. We aren't the ones who are not willing to budge. We've now offered, this is the third or fourth compromise to the Senate. They simply ignore us, throw it in the trash can. House Republicans have now offered multiple bills, including one with just a repeal of the widely unpopular medical device tax. We've even incorporated changes that the Senate had proposed, but the Senate still refuses to engage, as does the White House. Today we offer yet another piece of legislation designed to keep the government open. As with the previous CRs that the House has considered, this continuing resolution will fund the government through December 15th at the current post-sequestration funding rate. It will incorporate most of the Senate's changes to our first CR and include the few additional changes that I proposed as an amendment and that were added in the House on Saturday night. It will also delay for 1 year Obamacare's individual mandate and eliminate the employer subsidy for the health insurance plans of members of Congress and our staffs and for political appointees at the White House. No one, Mr. Speaker, is going to like everything in this bill. I don't like everything in this bill. But the continuing resolution before us today is the most immediate path to avoiding a shutdown. I expect that the House will do the right thing and approve this CR today. I remain hopeful that the Senate will work with the House and pass this legislation. The people of this great nation deserve more. They deserve a government that works for, not against them. At the very least, that is a government that keeps its doors open. So I urge all members, every single member, to vote yes on this continuing resolution. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized for as much time as she may consume.
Here we go again. Republicans insist on including riders that do not belong in an appropriations bill. Both the Senate and the President already made clear they will not accept these provisions. Still, the majority insists on taking the country toward a shutdown in a few short hours. As the clock ticks toward midnight, when appropriations will lapse and the government will shut down, Republicans have put forward the third version of a bill that is designed to shut down government unless we delay, defund, and deny affordable health care to American families. Mr. Speaker, Republicans claim Democrats refuse to negotiate. Let's review the history and Democrats' support for a compromise to keep government running. Republicans pushed us to the brink of default in the summer of 2011, resulting in a credit downgrade. Republicans walked out of negotiations with the President last December, aimed at reaching a budget deal for this year. Republicans have refused to work with the Senate on the budget all year long. Republican leadership caved to the Tea Party and withdrew a plan that in all likelihood would have ended this standoff by separating health care legislation from a bill to keep the government running. And now Republicans refuse to say yes to the great concession made by Democrats in the Senate and the White House on the Republican spending level. The shutdown isn't only tarnished by Republican fingerprint, it is entirely of their making. We could avoid a shutdown by allowing a vote on the Senate's clean bill, but Republicans just won't allow it. This is no way to run the House of Representatives. This is no way to serve the hardworking people of the United States of America whom we represent. I urge my colleagues to vote against the Republican government shutdown. I yield back.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman. You know, I never supported Obamacare because it's not sound policy. But if my fellow Americans have to endure this law, then why not should not the Congress, the President, and the Vice President endure it as well? You see, today's vote is about fairness. It's why I introduced my amendment to the continuing resolution to make sure that we would eliminate the Obamacare fix that was given to us by the Office of Personnel Management. You see, the American public understand what's going on. They understand that Congress always carves out their own little special interests, their little special treatment. The amendment today, this CR, would eliminate that. It would do one thing that this Congress so desperately needs, and that's to gain the sense of credibility that the American people are looking for. It's not about gamesmanship. They're tired of that. This is about leading by example. And while I laud my colleagues for allowing us to have this vote here today, I stood on this floor on Saturday explaining why this was so important to the American people, why it is so important to this Congress, and therefore I will say to you, even though it's politically difficult and sometimes politically hard to do the right thing, doing the right thing is always the right thing to do. I would urge support of this CR, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I yield for unanimous consent. Mr. Green from Texas.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to place a statement into the record opposing this resolution.
Without objection, it will be part of the record. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Labor, Health, Human Services, Education Committee, Ms. Delora.
The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 2 minutes.
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. We are hours away from a shutdown of the federal government that will damage our economy, make life harder for millions of families, especially families living on the edge. If the majority continues on this path, hundreds of thousands of workers will be sent home. Many others will continue to work without pay. Anti-hunger and nutrition support to women, infants, and children will dry up. Home and small business lending will freeze. Life-saving research will be put on hold. Parks and museums will close. The one thing this will not stop is the Affordable Care Act going into effect. That act is the law of the land, passed by the Congress, signed by the President, upheld by the Supreme Court, and endorsed by the American people last November. Tomorrow, regardless of what the majority tries to do here tonight, enrollment begins so that affordable health insurance coverage is available. Instead of working with Democrats to move a budget forward, the majority's leadership is allowing the fringe ideologues in their party to turn the budget process into a hostage crisis. Kill the Affordable Care Act, they argue, or America gets it. This is not responsible leadership. Nonpartisan studies have shown that the delay in this amendment will cause higher health insurance premiums, higher costs for the government, and worse health care coverage for everyone. The majority knows exactly what they are doing. 2 days ago, they introduced amendments that were poison pills. Now we see an equally poisonous amendment to the budget today. They are rooting for a shutdown. One Republican member even said, and I quote, "We're very excited. It's exactly what we wanted, and we got it." Another said, and I quote, "It's wonderful." It is not wonderful. It is terrible for our economy and for our families. This is extortion, and this is hostage-taking. I urge my colleagues to oppose it, and I yield back.
The lady has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves his time. The lady from New York.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capter.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
I thank Ranking Member Lowy for yielding. Mr. Speaker, our nation is stronger when we come together as we the people to solve the serious challenges facing our country. Yet we find ourselves on the precipice of a GOP-driven government shutdown. The standoff between the Tea Party and other Republicans is now leading to a GOP shutdown of our entire federal government. Extreme partisanship threatens our economic recovery and job creation across our country. Thousands of workers at Ohio's largest employer, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, about to be furloughed. Most NASA employees, including the NASA Glenn Research Center at Brook Park near Cleveland, will be sent home. Here in Washington, as World War II veterans are on their way here with honor flights across this country to visit the World War II Memorial on the Mall, will find the Visitor Center closed. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to govern by staggering from manufactured crisis to manufactured crisis. The madness must stop. America needs leadership, not extreme partisanship. We need statesmanship, not brinkmanship. America has work to do, putting our people back to work, educating the next generation, curbing crime, and improving health care. So the Republicans want to shut down the government? This will deeply hurt our country. It will hurt Ohio. There's no reason for it beyond shameful partisan politics. It's time for the Republicans in Congress to come to their senses. Vote against the GOP shutdown.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my neighbor in Kentucky, gentleman from Lexington, Andy Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight, the House is voting once again to fund the government and to prevent a shutdown. The House is also continuing the effort to listen to the American people and give a voice to those who want to limit the harmful impact of Obamacare. The President says that the House is shutting down the government, but the House has acted multiple times to prevent a government shutdown. It is the President and the Senate Majority Leader who are refusing to negotiate, refusing to compromise, refusing to seek a bipartisan solution or a middle ground. The President will negotiate with Vladimir Putin. The President will negotiate with the leaders of Iran. But he won't negotiate with the duly elected representatives of the people in Congress. In divided government, the only way forward is to negotiate. The American people witnessed one-party rule in 2010 when Congress rammed through Obamacare on a party-line vote, and they didn't like it. The only thing that was bipartisan about Obamacare in 2010 when it was enacted was the bipartisan opposition to it. And so they elected a different Congress, and they divided power. And so when you have divided power in government, the only way forward, when there is a difference of opinion, is to negotiate and compromise. I come from the district, Mr. Speaker, of Henry Clay, a great Speaker of the House. Henry Clay is a model for this President and this Congress. We need to come together, negotiate, and abandon the stubborn refusal to lead, which will guarantee a government shutdown. The President needs to work with House Republicans to find a middle ground, and this bill is the middle ground, Mr. Speaker. When I found out that members of Congress, the President, members of his cabinet, and the political elite in Washington got a special exemption from Obamacare, I introduced a simple two-page piece of legislation, and it's called the Live by the Laws You Write Act. And it's a simple concept. Why should we allow the administration to delay Obamacare for large employers and exempt members of Congress, himself, and the elite, but not also provide relief for individuals and families? I believe that the President and members of Congress should live by the same health care law that they have imposed on the American people. And so I call on my colleagues in the House, both on this side and that side of the aisle, to support fairness for the American people. If Obamacare is what the President insists on, then it should apply to everyone, and that includes the politicians in Washington. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentlelady from New York.
I'm pleased to yield, Mr. Speaker, 2 minutes to the ranking member from Indiana, Mr. Visklosky.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
I appreciate the gentlewoman yielding.
Mr. Speaker, I have heard a lot of discussion about the budget. I have heard a lot of discussion about a continuing resolution, and I have heard a lot about the Affordable Care Act. But I see the chairman of the Appropriations Committee here on the floor, and I see the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee on the floor, and I don't hear a lot of discussion about what I would call the operative word tonight, and that is appropriations. In Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, the Congress is charged with constituting tribunals, courts, inferior to the Supreme Court. In the very next section, we are told we need to appropriate those monies to do so. We are told in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution that Congress must provide and maintain a Navy. In Section 9, we are told, absent an appropriations from the Congress, that will not happen. The fiscal year begins tomorrow, and my great fear is that when a resolution of this continuing resolution occurs, if the date is December 15th, we are going to make every agency and every department of the United States government operate just as they did last year. And of course, last year we made them operate the way they did the year before and have them wait for another 2.5 months before we tell them what we are going to do. I would suggest the operative word tonight is appropriations. We should do the defense appropriations bill. We should do the energy and water appropriation bill. We should do the Homeland Security appropriation bill. We should do the military construction VA appropriation bill. We should do the other appropriation bills that are necessary to fund the operation of the greatest country on the planet Earth, and we should stop what we're doing here. Thank you very much.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fact one, Obamacare passed by the House Democrats, 219 of them. 34 Democrats joined the Republicans in opposition. Let us see how many of those will join us in this upcoming vote. Fact two, Republicans have been and are poised to fund everything in government at the current levels and are eager to do so. Fact three, polls show that Americans are overwhelmingly in favor of defunding Obamacare. Fact four, the House, like it or not, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the House is the keeper of the purse under the Constitution, and we are well within our authority to defund an ill-conceived and an unpopular program and law. Now, they say that the Republicans are going to shut down the government, but I will submit this, Mr. Speaker. The Democrats began to shut down the government in 2010 when they passed Obamacare with no bipartisan support. They not only began to shut down the government, but the recovery of the American economy, and for them to come now and say that this is a Republican shutdown is unbelievable. We stand ready, willing, and able to fund this. There's only really one question that remains, Mr. Speaker. 4 facts, one simple question. Will those same Democrats that voted in opposition of Obamacare and the Senate listen to the American public? Will they listen to their constituents? Will they vote with us this time so that our government can be funded, no shutdown will be necessary, and American economy can continue to thrive? I'm Randy Weber. I yield back.
Back is time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, the ranking member of the Interior Subcommittee.
I thank my good friend. So apparently we're here largely because a bunch of folks on the Republican side, Tea Party folks, fancy themselves strict constructionists. But I would remind them that the founders set up the Senate to ensure that the House would act rationally and responsibly on a consistent basis. And George Washington warned us against factionalism. They expected us to fund the government, to pay our debts, and they underscored the fact that when you have a disagreement, it ought to be resolved democratically. So here we have a bill that passed the House and the Senate. The conference report passed both the House and Senate, signed by the President. We have 2 national referenda called presidential elections. President Obama wins by 5 million votes. We don't have the right to repeal Obamacare. Call it what you want. It's the law of the land. But now I understand that we are being told that unless you gut this legislation for an entire year, that the Republican majority will not even fund the government for 45 days? Really? What kind of a deal is that? That's not reasonable. You know, the idea that you would send 800,000 people home tomorrow, not knowing when they can come back to work, not even allowing them back to their offices, take billions of dollars out of this economy, erode the confidence that people in the United States and around the world ought to be able to have in the United States government, and you're going to do all this because you want to repeal a bill that is the law of the land? Just because you have the leverage that you can hold up the government from being able to operate for 45 days? That's nuts. Our founders would be ashamed of what this Congress has become. We're dysfunctional. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves. This ought to be defeated. Thank you.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Sure about time.
Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, the ranking member of the Homeland Security.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we're just now hours away from the Tea Party-inspired government shutdown. Here our Republican colleagues go again, holding the economy hostage to their ideological demands and their take-it-or-leave-it politics. This isn't the behavior of responsible legislators or of a serious political party willing to do what it takes to govern. The only party that has actually compromised on the bill before us is Democrats, who've agreed to a short-term funding level below the Senate budget resolution, despite our belief that we should be replacing sequestration instead of locking it in. By contrast, Republican leaders have steadfastly refused to go to conference to work out a budget with Senate Democrats. They walked away from negotiations with the President on a comprehensive budget deal in December. And now it is Republicans, as the President said, who are demanding a ransom merely for doing their job of keeping the government open. That ransom, incredibly, is health insurance for millions of our fellow citizens. The Affordable Care Act has been upheld as the law of the land by a majority of Congress, a majority of the U.S. Supreme Court, and a majority of Americans at the ballot box. If the junior senator from Texas and his acolytes think they can overturn these decisions unilaterally, I suggest they consult the Constitution, and I'd be happy to loan them a copy. Mr. Speaker, we've got to reject this latest Republican ploy. And in this body, in this country, we've got to get back to the basics. Keep the government running, pay the country's bills, and negotiate a comprehensive budget plan that ensures our fiscal future. And now yield back.
Expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance.
The gentleman from Kentucky continues to reserve. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, ranking member Sam Farr.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Congressman Lowy, for yielding. For those that may not understand what we're trying to do, all we have to do is pass one simple bill that was here in the House that the Senate gave us, is to let's keep the government open for a number of days and continue to argue the other issues. But now that's not what we're doing. We're taking that bill and just loading it up with a bunch of stuff that's been rejected time and time again. And the consequence of that is you're not going to have a bill to the President tonight, and the government will have to shut down. It's a huge mistake. And it's not something we do. We've never done it. In fact, the time I've been here, we've had big partisan disputes. Our party fought vehemently against President Bush's decision to go to war in Iraq. We thought it was without evidence and certainly was going to cost the government a lot of money and probably not have great outcome. We didn't shut down the government after we lost that debate. Instead, we tried to make it work. We fought against welfare reform. We thought that that reform and making everybody go to work even though they didn't know how to read and write and mothers should be taking care of their children, we fought vehemently against it, and we lost. And we didn't shut down government. We made it work. We fought against when Wall Street came in and said, tomorrow we fail. We thought, well, it's the Republican watch. They're responsible for this. Wall Street's their business. They like that. But when we were told that this was going to bring down the economy of the country and the world, we helped get it passed. In fact, there were more Democratic votes than Republican votes. We didn't shut down government. We made it work. Tonight, we're on the verge of shutting down government. It's going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to hurt farmers who want to export food. It's going to hurt 8.7 million mothers in this country who want to feed their children on the WIC program. It's going to hurt 13 million children who go to school and will lose access to a school breakfast. It's going to hurt 31 million children who will lose their school meals and 47 million low-income people who will not be able to get food stamps. It's a mean, reckless, ill-conceived idea to shut down government.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished representative from California, Ms. Barbara Lee.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding. First, let me just say, here we go again, Mr. Speaker. It's really no secret that the Tea Party Republicans came here not really as public servants, but to destroy and to decimate our government. Now, we are only hours away from Tea Party extremists achieving their goal of shutting down the government. This is really their dream vote. They want to shut down the government and declare victory. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, this is shameful and it is downright wrong. Their dream of shutdown will create a nightmare for millions. What about the government workforce who have families to feed, mortgages and rent to pay? What about small businesses that stand to pay the cost of these Tea Party antics? And yes, what about women and children who will lose nutrition assistance? This is downright mean. Make no mistake, the unnecessary GOP shutdown will have serious consequences for millions, and it's entirely unnecessary. It's not enough that the Republicans have already voted 45 times to repeal all or parts of the Affordable Care Act, and it's not enough that the Affordable Care Act is the law of the land and was upheld by the Supreme Court. Tea Party extremists now want to violate this law in a very sinister way. It's not enough that their shutdown will hurt families and our economy. This Tea Party obsession, and it's an obsession, to kill the government and to deny health care to millions of Americans, this must end. They need to do their job and keep the government open. As President Obama said this afternoon, you don't get to extract a ransom for doing your job. This hostage-taking must end. We must vote no. We must keep the government open. And I just urge all of us to think about those people who will wake up tomorrow morning with their lives in such disarray, the uncertainty that's going to exist. We should not do this. The American people don't deserve this. We need to keep the government open. We're pleading with the Tea Party extremists. Do not shut the government down.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee for Labor, Health and Human Services. Mr. Kingston from Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Kentucky, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that we are here tonight to keep the government open. I keep hearing that we want to shut the government down, and yet this is actually our third attempt to send something to the U.S. Senate to give them an opportunity to negotiate with us. And why are we here talking about a continuing resolution to begin with? Well, we're here because this year the House Appropriations Committee, with my colleagues on the other side, have passed 5 separate appropriation bills. Now, there are 12 total, but unfortunately, during the time period that we've passed 5, the Senate has passed 0. Last year, the House passed 7, and the Senate passed 1. After a while, you see there's a pattern. The Senate doesn't want to work on regular order. The Senate really does prefer continuing resolutions because then they can pull stunts like the one Harry Reid is doing now. You know, Mr. Speaker, where were they yesterday? Where were they this weekend? The Senate adjourned. Where was the President? He was playing golf. He was so concerned about the government being shut down. Now, what is the issue with Obamacare? The Speaker at the time, Ms. Pelosi, said we need to pass the bill so we can find out what's in it. Now that bill has grown to 7.5 feet in height, and we are reading what's in it. But 2 things we know that it does not accomplish is it does not decrease the cost of health care, and it does not increase the accessibility. And those were the 2 major objectives. Those were the selling points. Health care is 1/6 of the economy. Therefore, I think it's the right thing to fight over. This is something that affects every American. But we know already that premiums have skyrocketed under Obamacare and that they'll only grow worse. We also know that many major companies and smaller companies are stopping providing insurance to their employees. Accessibility is going down as well. So Obamacare has been a failure. Why is it that the Democrat Party believes in it so bad, even when it fails, they can't let go? I don't think it's a bad thing to say, hey, you know what, we were wrong. We tried to decrease the cost of health care, we tried to increase the accessibility, but we did not achieve that. Therefore, maybe Harry Reid should sit down with Speaker Boehner. Maybe the President of the United States can interrupt his negotiations with the Iranians and come and talk to the Americans, i.e. Republican Americans. I think it would be a good thing. This, again, Mr. Speaker, this will be our 3rd attempt to work with the Harry Reid Democrats to keep the government open. But I want to say this also to my friends on the other side of the aisle who have said well, they want to shut down the government. Let me mention we had 17 shutdowns since 1976, and often it might say, well, that's when you have split government. But in the year 1977, could I have another minute?
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 additional minute.
In 1977, the government shut down 3 separate times, once for 8 days, a second time for 8 days, and another time for 12 days. And the Democrats controlled the House, the Democrats controlled the Senate, and there was a Democrat in the White House. Indeed, over the history of the last 25 years, there have been a number of government shutdowns until the Senate, the House, and the White House sat down and negotiated. And that's all we're saying tonight is, you know what? We understand we don't control government, but we are willing to negotiate. It is time for cooler heads to prevail in the U.S. Senate. It's time for the U.S. Senate to have some adult leadership and sit down with House leadership and hammer out the differences. And that's why we're here right now, while the Senate, I believe, has already gone home. I guess the President is no longer playing golf, but we are ready to negotiate. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask how much time remaining?
The gentlelady from New York has 4 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Kentucky has 5.5 minutes remaining.
Yes, I do.
I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as 800,000 federal employees think about what their fate is going to be in a very few hours from now, we're on the House floor as our Republican colleagues say, well, we'll pay for the government if you accede to these 3 or 4 demands. It seems like every day they come up with some new demands, but they don't ever arrive at funding the government. The American people know, Mr. Speaker, that there is a Senate bill, a CR, a continuing resolution, which is ready, that we can put on the floor now and fund the government and avert the shutdown. My question is, will our Republican colleagues, will our Speaker do that? There are moments when leadership is at issue, and this is one of them. We need the leadership that will stand here and put that Senate, that clean continuing resolution on the floor so that we can avert a government shutdown and make sure that federal employees can pay their mortgage, can buy groceries, and can have a future. I yield back.
Has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the very distinguished Speaker of the House of Representatives, gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Boehner.
The Speaker of the House, the gentleman from Ohio, is recognized for 1 minute.
Let me thank my colleague for yielding. The American people don't want to shut down, and neither do I. I didn't come here to shut down the government. I came here to fight for a smaller, less costly, and more accountable federal government. But here we find ourselves in this moment dealing with a law that's causing unknown consequences and unknown damage to the American people and to our economy. And that issue was Obamacare. For those of you who don't recall, it was passed in the middle of the night, 2,300 pages that no one had ever read, and it's having all types of consequences for the American people, our constituents, having all kinds of consequences for employers. And as a result, over the last year or so, last couple of years, the President, given his friends and the labor unions, some 1,100 waivers to this law. This summer, the President decided, well, we're not going to enforce the employer mandate. Big employers around the country are all upset about having to make sure they provided health care for their employees, causing big problems. And the result of all of this is you've got employers all over the country who can't hire people, who are cutting the hours of their workers. It's having a devastating impact. Something has to be done. So my Republican colleagues and I thought we should defund the law for a year. We thought we should delay it for a year. Our friends over in the Senate don't seem to want to go down that path. But I'm going to tell you what, this is an issue of fairness. How can we give waivers and breaks to all the big union guys out there? How do we give a break to all the big businesses out there and yet stick our constituents with a bill that they don't want and a bill they can't afford? That's what this fight's all about. I talked to the President earlier tonight. I'm not going to negotiate. I'm not going to negotiate. We're not going to do this. Well, I would say to the President, this is not about me, and it's not about Republicans here in Congress. It's about fairness for the American people. Why don't we make sure that every American is treated just like we are? But no, under the law, in some decision, there's this idea that we're going to get some exemption. No, we're not going to get an exemption. So the bill before us is very simple. It funds the government, and it says let's treat our constituents fairly. No more mandate for the next year that you have to buy insurance that you can't afford. No more mandate that members of Congress get some so-called exemption. Those are the only 2 issues here. All the Senate has to do is say yes, and the government's funded tomorrow. Let's listen to our constituents, and let's treat them the way we would want to be treated. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentlelady from New York.
I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Tonight is about the continuing destructive obsession that our Republican friends have and their refusal to recognize that there was an election just some months ago. And you made the argument to the American people, and they rejected that argument and re-elected President Obama. And you have not gotten over that to this minute. And as a result, you're about to shut down the government. You can get up here and say over and over and over and over again, we don't want to shut down the government. But your actions belie, Mr. Speaker, their actions belie their words. Mr. Speaker, Democrats, as will surprise no one, are against shutting down this government. It's bad for our people. It's bad for our security. It's bad for our economy. It's bad for jobs, and you all know that. And you don't have the votes because the people elected Democrats as the majority in the Senate and the President of the United States. And they don't agree with you. And Newt Gingrich said when that was the case, you had to compromise. And what compromise are we talking about? We're taking your number. Your number. And you will not take yes for an answer. How sad. What a shameful day this is in the history of the House of Representatives. A shutdown would be harmful to our economy, our national security, and the creation of jobs, as I just said. That's why we have compromised and said we'll take your number to keep government open while we negotiate over the next 6 weeks. Nobody in your party rationally believed that you were going to succeed in your objective. Nobody. It's a political ploy. It's a message to your most radical, Mr. Speaker, to their most radical contingent. We are willing to take the next 6 weeks to discuss how we get from where we are to where we need to be. May I have one additional minute?
Gentleman is recognized for one additional minute.
We could do that, Mr. Speaker, if only Republicans would take yes for an answer. Their Tea Party faction has made it clear where it stands. They don't like the Affordable Care Act. I don't think anybody doubts that. But the Affordable Care Act has been upheld by the Supreme Court and remains the law of our land. Mr. Speaker, the Senate has now voted twice to send us a clean CR. Now it's time for the Speaker and the Majority Leader to put the Senate's clean compromise CR on this floor and, in their words, let the House work its will. Have the courage, Mr. Speaker, to have the majority party put on this floor a bill which will keep the government open and which the Senate will pass. Mr. Speaker, have the Republican Party have the courage of its rhetoric and let the House work its will. I dare you to do that. Let democracy work. Don't be dictating to America that they're going to shut down the government. Let's vote on it. Put a clean CR on this floor, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how many speakers the gentlelady?
The gentlelady's time from New York has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of our time, the 1 minute, to the very distinguished Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Cantor of Virginia.
From Virginia, the Majority Leader is recognized for the balance of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I thank the gentleman from Kentucky and his leadership in bringing this bill to the floor. And, you know, it's interesting, my colleague who just spoke, the Democratic whip, talked about democracy and insisting that we bring democracy to the House. Well, I would respond to my friend and tell him that democracy is founded upon the principle that there is equal treatment under the law. So tonight's debate is not about trying to stifle democracy. Tonight's debate is trying to insist that the minority party and its policies, it's trying to stop the administration from carving out special treatment for special interest. It's about telling this administration and this president that there should be no special treatment for members of Congress. There should be no special treatment for big business. There should be no special treatment for members of Congress. We all live under the same laws. Mr. Speaker, hardworking Americans around this country want a government that puts people first. And since Obamacare was passed in a highly partisan manner, the President himself and other members of his party have offered unilateral exemptions and delays for special interest groups and for members of this Congress. So you've got to ask, why are members of Congress exempt from the pains of Obamacare? Why are these special interests exempt from the pains of Obamacare? Shouldn't we also exempt the hard-working families of this country from the pains of Obamacare? There should be no special treatment for anyone under the law. That is a founding principle of this country. No special treatment for anyone. Equal application, equal treatment under the law. Delaying the individual mandate for American families and withdrawing the exemption for members of Congress is what this bill is about, and it is the right thing to do. Now is the time for our President to lead. Now is the time for the Senate to act. The stubborn refusal to work across the aisle is the reason why Americans today are so frustrated by what they see in Washington. House Republicans have now offered 3 possible solutions to fund our government and to protect working middle-class families from losing a job, from losing their health care, or losing part of their paycheck due to Obamacare. And Senate Democrats have offered nothing. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, they didn't even show up for work. No one should shut down the government in order to protect special treatment for members of this House or the other body. No one should shut down this government in order to protect special treatment for big business and special interests. It is time for all of us to think about America's hard-working middle-class families. Now is the time to pass this resolution to keep the government working on behalf of the people who sent us here, and I urge my colleagues in the House to support this continuing resolution. I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 367, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the motion. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The recorded vote is requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on adoption of the motion will be followed by a 5-minute vote on approval of the journal if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
With the end of fiscal year 2013 less than 4 hours away, and Congress having not completed work on any of the fiscal year 2014 spending bills, Congress is in session, the House and Senate in session this evening, working till late hours to resolve the situation with the continuing resolution debate. The House is considering proposed changes to the Senate version of the continuing resolution. These latest changes would delay the implementation of the individual mandate in the 2010 health care law. They would also strip out subsidies for members of Congress and their staff. This is a 15-minute vote on those changes. And during this vote, we're going to open up our phone lines, as we've been doing throughout the day and the weekend, to get your thoughts. It's 202-585-3885 for Democrats, Republicans 202-585-3886. Independents and others, 202-585-3887. We'll get to your phone calls momentarily. And one quick programming note. Many of you tune in Monday nights for our First Lady series, Season 2 underway. Florence Harding, the featured First Lady this evening. Our First Lady's program for tonight is moving over to C-SPAN 3 due to our congressional coverage tonight. C-SPAN 3, it's also available online at cspan.org, streaming live. And we will re-air the Florence Harding program on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Your calls next, but first, reaction from 3 hours ago from President Obama. He has since phoned several members of the House, including Speaker Boehner, to talk about the continuing resolution. But earlier this evening, late this afternoon, the President said at a news briefing that lawmakers risk throwing a, quote, wrench into the gears of the recovering economy. Here's some of what he had to say, and then we will hear from you.
Here's the bottom line. I'm always willing to work with anyone of either party to make sure the Affordable Care Act works better, to make sure our government works better. I'm always willing to work with anyone to grow our economy faster or to create new jobs faster, to get our fiscal house in order for the long run. I've demonstrated this time and time again, oftentimes to the consternation of my own party. But one faction of one party in one House of Congress in one branch of government doesn't get to shut down the entire government just to refight the results of an election. Keeping the people's government open is not a concession to me. Keeping vital services running and hundreds of thousands of Americans on the job is not something you give to the other side. It's our basic responsibility. It's something that we're doing for our military and our businesses and our economy and all the hard-working people out there, the person working for the agricultural department out in some rural community who's out there helping some farmers make sure that they're making some modest profit for all the hard work they're putting in. They're the person working for HUD who's helping somebody buy a house for the first time. There's somebody in a VA office who's counseling one of our vets who's got PTSD. That's who we're here to serve. That's why we're supposed to be carrying out these responsibilities. That's why we should be avoiding this kinds of constant brinksmanship. It's something that we do in the ordinary process of this extraordinary system of government that we have. You don't get to extract a ransom for doing your job, for doing what you're supposed to be doing anyway, or just because there's a law there that you don't like. The American people sent us here to govern. They sent us here to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make their lives a little bit better, to create new jobs, to restore economic security, to rebuild the prospects of upward mobility. That's what they expect. And they understand that there are differences between the parties. And we're going to be having some tough fights around those differences. And I respect the fact that the other party's not supposed to agree with me 100% of the time, just like I don't agree with them. But they do also expect that we don't bring the entire government to a halt or the entire economy to a halt just because of those differences. And that's what they deserve. They've worked too hard for too long to recover from previous crises just to have folks here in Washington manufacture yet another one that they have to dig themselves out of. So Congress needs to keep our government open, needs to pay our bills on time, and never ever threaten the full faith and credit of the United States of America. And time's running out.
That's President Obama from about 5 o'clock Eastern. He spoke with reporters for about 10 minutes total. Live look here at the House floor. They're voting on two changes to the continuing resolution. This is the resolution that will fund the federal government past the end of the fiscal year, which is midnight tonight, and through December the 15th. The other changes it makes would be to delay the implementation of the individual mandate It would also add the so-called Vitter Amendment, limiting federal health care subsidies provided to members of Congress and their staff. A tweet from Politico's Manu Raju before we go to your calls. He's saying that he tweets that the Senate will vote within an hour of the House vote to strip Obamacare language and call on the House to pass a 6-week CR. You may recall that the original Senate changes of last week were to change that CR to November 15th, not December 15th, which is what the House wants. Champaign, Illinois, up first. Brandon, good evening. He's on our Democrats line.
Hi. I just wanted to clear up a common misconception among Republicans, which is a result of a distortion which is incessantly repeated until many of them take it as truth. Congress is not exempt from Obamacare. In fact, they're being forced to take insurance from the exchange as a result of an amendment added to the Affordable Care Act by a Republican. Like most other large employers, the federal government contributes a portion to the premiums of its employees. However, the Affordable Care Act does not force employers to discontinue their employee health insurance contributions. The issue is that the amendment did not address how the federal government's contribution would work when representatives get their insurance on the exchange. The oft-touted exemption is actually just a rule which ensures that congressional workers will continue to receive their employer contributions to help them buy their insurance on the exchange, just as our current employees getting contributions from their employers will continue to receive those same contributions.
And adding on to that, CQ writes about what the Vitter Amendment, which is what the House is adding, one of the two changes here to the law, that it would require the president, vice president, political employees to purchase health insurance through the healthcare law state insurance exchanges, is currently required for members of Congress and the congressional staff. George is in Toms River, New Jersey, on our Republican line.
Hi, my name is George from Toms River.
Hey, Tom. Hey, George, rather, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just a little upset because I have a 75-year-old father, and I'm 45 years old, just coming back to him.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the whole thing is for the government to shut down, and he's got a pre-existing heart condition with a defibrillator, and I'm diabetic myself.
Where's your health care provider from? Is this through the VA or
my father's under Medicare, and I was under Medicaid. But at this time, my Medicaid is now ceased. I got off public. I'm no longer on public assistance. I was trying to get back into the workforce. So as of right now, myself, I have no health coverage.
Well, in the President's comments earlier this evening, he mentioned Medicare. He mentioned that Medicare doctors still will be seeing patients. Sue's in Bend, Oregon. She's on our independent line. Sue,
hello?
Hi there. You're on the air.
Okay, this is, I just kind of want to know where the Republicans are getting their figures from, because there's so many people here in Oregon that have no insurance. I always had insurance until the crash, and then I had a heart attack. I have no insurance. They're threatening to attach my house, and we can't wait for Obamacare to come in. I went to the United Nations meetings on CSD 17, and the representative from Sudan said, if the government put as much money into clean water as they did getting people to CSD, have the Republicans added up what they've spent on advertisement for this? They could have funded the health care.
Sue, thanks for your call. Checking some comments on Twitter. The hashtag we've been using is C-SPAN chat. Funksand says, when you've been told no 42 times, threatening extortion is not the beginning of negotiations. Another view from Alan, who says the Democrats and Obama are furious because the shutdown requires them to compromise on the ACA, something they have refused to do for 3 years. Bowling Green, Kentucky, on our Democrats line. Charles, good evening.
Actually, Charles couldn't make it here. My name is Wendy Boyd.
Okay, make sure that, Wendy, that you mute your set, your television or radio, and go ahead with your comment.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But I really don't think that the government should shut down due to the fact there would be so much chaos. You've got people that's going to die, you know. People that has like 2-year-old kids, 3-year-old kids like myself, we need that money to support our kids. it's not going. It's just going to make things a whole lot worse than what it already is.
Next up to Craig. Thanks for that call. Craig is in Hartford, Kentucky. He's on our GOP line.
How you doing?
Doing fine, Craig.
Well, I just wanted to call and say I really would like to thank C-SPAN for this extensive look into the government on this health care spending and whatnot. And as a Republican and a pretty much libertarian, 5 combat tour veteran, I would like to say that I believe the media runs a lot of this into the ground. We need to come to the table and actually start talking about this. There's a lot of things about the Obamacare that are going to hurt this country, and there's a lot of things that will help this country. But we have succumbed ourselves to titles. We need to say we're all Americans, and there's people that need help that we need to help, and there's people that do not need help that we're trying to help. So if we could just slow down the movement of these bills, like Pelosi ran it through before they even read it, we could have probably not even had, we could have avoided this problem to begin with. What do you think?
Craig, thanks for that call. Just we've asked about the political nature of this on our Facebook page, facebook.com/cspan, asking who's responsible for the current fiscal stalemate in Congress. Congressional Democrats 941, Congressional Republicans 3,986, and people who say it's the White House is some 1,200. That's facebook.com/cspan. Let's hear from Stephen, who is on our others line in Springfield, Missouri.
Thank you for taking my call, sir.
You bet.
Yeah, delaying a business mandate is not the same as delaying the individual mandate. Businesses will not die or get sick by not having to comply. But people will if they're not allowed access to the ACA. This whole episode is just embarrassing the whole nation. Thank you. That's all I have.
John's in Sandston, Virginia, on our Democrats line.
Hey, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I've been listening to a lot of things, and frankly, I'm a little embarrassed that I'm from a state that sent Eric Canna to Congress. But I'm thankful that I'm not in his district. But in listening to some of these things, I've come to the conclusion that when you keep trying to do something that you know is not going to happen, it doesn't make any sense. The thing to do, in my opinion, is not to try to defund Obamacare. Let it run for a year. Find out what works and find out what doesn't work and sit down and try to correct it. Because this is a big issue, shutting down the government. And it just doesn't make sense to me that the Republicans are willing to do that just to stand on principle.
Well, if the proposed changes by Republicans don't happen tonight, the individual markets, the state exchanges will open up tomorrow as part of the Affordable Care Act. A tweet on what's going on Capitol Hill, Mike Mamoli of the Tribune, Los Angeles Times, saying that a Senate aide has said within the hour of the House vote, quote, the Senate will send our clean CR to the House, stripped of whatever amendments they add. The Senate's been in session since earlier today, when by a 54 to 46 they tabled the amendments that were made by the House during Saturday's session. Linda is in Tucson. She's on our GOP line. Hi, Linda.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm a Republican, stronghold Republican, and also a nurse. And I think Obamacare is one of the worst things that will affect our nation nationally for years to come, and that it should be defunded. And there's other possibilities that could have happened, except our president was not willing or maybe able to understand that there are other alternatives to occur. I'm hoping that we don't pass this, and I'm hoping it stands straight. And if we do, then it's going to be one of the worst things that America's ever had to deal with.
Well,
now and in the future of America, and will probably destroy America from the inside, which is his point.
Linda, as a health care provider, as a nurse, what's your biggest concern about the health care law?
The biggest concern is most doctors don't want it. Nurses, we know what we need and we know what's out there, and it's just ridiculous to think that the government is going to be able to fund health care. Every other country in the world that I have had relations with as a traveling nurse, it does not work. Women can wait 9 months before getting breast surgery for breast cancer. You can wait to get a total hip done. It may take a year to get that MRI done. And in the meantime, health suffers. People suffer for this. Unless you can go from, say, Canada into the United States where you can pay to get your health care. You can't even pay if you have the money to go forward to get your health care because it's against the law to do that.
Thanks for being part of the conversation tonight. Under 100 votes left on the House floor. As of today, there are 432 members of the House because of vacancies, 3 vacancies in the House, and then Ed Markey went over to be a senator from Massachusetts. So the numbers are 232 on the Republican side, 200 on the Democratic side, meaning that for the amendments to carry, they'd need 217 for passage. You can see on the screen there are 83 members yet to vote. We'll take a few more of your calls. Steve's in Hudson, North Carolina. He's on our others line.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. My concern this evening is all this blame going on. We need to get back and get to working one with another. It all started when the bill was pushed through by Pelosi that half of the people up there didn't even read it. It's destroying our country. We need to get back and work one with another. The liberals is eating away at the inside of America. Well, actually, there's a new word for liberals. It's socialistic. This government's to be for the people. Thank you very much.
Robert Costa, who is the Washington editor for the National Review, tweets that Boehner personally worked the floor to kill a minor King revolt. He's talking about Peter King, who had earlier said that a number of members would vote against the rule vote, allowing for debate and vote here on these amendments, these proposed changes. That didn't really happen in terms of the numbers. 6 Republicans voted against the rule an hour ago or so. This is Dallas. Pamela's in Dallas on our Democrats line.
Hello. I've been on Medicare since about 2001. And I remember when the Republicans passed the Part D prescription drug bill.
Right.
You know, and I deal with this. I hit catastrophic in April every year. They have a mandate in it. They've got a donut hole, huge deductible that they call the donut hole.
Right.
And my congressman, Pete Sessions, he famously called it skin in the game. No, my skin in the game is the medication that keeps me alive and keeps me out of the hospital. Okay, I'm now, after many years of chemotherapy, I'm stage 3 kidney failure now, so I'm not quite on dialysis yet, but I'm heading that way. I've had cardiac issues. Back in the 90s, I sat in a dentist chair and I got infected with HIV, and the donut hole. I live every year to year, putting the money it takes to get through the donut hole, the medication, on credit cards, because I year after year after year carry a high credit balance. My credit rating has taken a hit.
I'm going to let you go there, Pamela. This vote is winding down. Let's see if we can get one more call to our Republican line. Liz in Miami, Florida. Hi. Liz, are you there?
Hello?
Miami, Florida. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yes, I am a conservative Republican, you know. And then I want to know, because this health care passed, Obamacare passed with only the Democrats last year. It didn't count with Republicans. And then I see that because the Republicans have the Congress now, they blame all the things for the Republicans, you know. And then he's doing that, it's unconstitutional because he didn't count with both parties. He only did that with only one.
Liz, thanks for your calls. Thanks for all your calls. We will have more of them coming up, and certainly tomorrow morning on Washington Journal. But this is not over yet. The latest reporting is indicating that once the House finishes here, if it passes here, these two changes, it will move over to the Senate. We're hearing within the hour there will be some vote, and that, of course, will be over on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. The number needed in the House, based on the current number of 432, total is 217 to pass. There in the yay column you can see 211, so we'll stop here and watch the rest of the vote.
This vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 201. The motion is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The House will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.